Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I would like to welcome you to a special 5-part podcast series where I take a deep dive into the Miller and Chevalier Chartered 2020 Latin American Corruption Survey. In this podcast series, I visit with lawyers from Miller's FCPA and International Anti-Corruption Practice Group. They focus on matters involving the FCPA, money laundering, business and human rights, and other areas of international corporate compliance. They have experience with every facet of FCPA enforcement, from inception to completion, including developing work plans for international investigations, conducting internal investigations, developing remediation strategies, disclosing issues to the U.S. government, and negotiating resolutions with the government, as well as developing strategies for collateral issues, selecting independent monitors, and interfacing with independent monitors. If you ever find yourself in the need for an FCPA or international anti-corruption lawyer, check out any of these lawyers from Miller and Chevalier. Over this series, I will visit with James Tillen, Matt Ellis, Alejandro Almonte, and Greg Bates. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. In this Part 4 of our 5-part exploration of the Miller and Chevalier 2020 Latin American Corruption Survey, I visit with Counsel Greg Bates, and we explore the survey's data on compliance program and design in Latin America. Hello, everyone. Tom Fox back for another episode in our 5-part podcast series on the Miller and Chevalier 2020 Latin American Corruption Survey. Today, I have with me Greg Bates. First of all, Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Greg, I'm really excited to visit with you because I'm an in-house guy, and so I think about compliance program design and implementation. And so I was wondering if I might start with, how does this survey help, or what does it mean for the in-house compliance specialist as opposed to perhaps the white-collar defense lawyer?
So I think for me, in having spent 6 years in-house and now really spending a lot of time sort of deep in the weeds with lots of companies that are going through really challenging times, I think probably the biggest advantage or the biggest takeaway I have from something like this is the benchmarking that you can do. I know that when I was in-house, we were always looking to see what peers were doing or see what companies with similar risk profiles or operating in similar geographies, what they were doing vis-a-vis their compliance program. And, developed a good network of folks to benchmark against. But if you don't have that, surveys are a wonderful way to go. And this survey we reached about 1,000 people all throughout the hemisphere. And it really does offer a lot of good data for compliance folks in-house to be able to use and look at their programs vis-a-vis what others are doing.
I've been able to interview members of your firm literally over the years on this survey. And one of the things that has struck me is that perhaps 10, 12, even 8 years ago, many of your clients were U.S. domestic companies moving into Brazil. And now I see, if not an equal number, a very large number of Brazilian companies looking to do business for what they would call internationally. And now it seems to me you have a great mix, which allows a U.S. compliance practitioner, a Brazilian compliance practitioner, perhaps even a European compliance practitioner to look at other international companies in a benchmark way. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a great Brazilian partner with this survey and reached several hundred Brazilian company representatives, and reached a further 600 or so out throughout the rest of the region. So Brazilians are certainly well positioned to take this survey, take the results, and think about their own compliance requirements domestically and see what other companies in their home market are doing, but then also as Brazilian companies, expand throughout the hemisphere to see what other folks are doing in those geographies as well.
Greg, I was wondering if you could give us sort of an overview of the trends you see about the compliance program data from the survey.
Sure. So I think, and this probably won't be too surprising to your listeners, but I think that a couple of the big takeaways are that multinational companies, particularly publicly traded companies, have more advanced compliance programs than the local companies, than privately held companies. That being said, we are seeing an uptick in sort of the sophistication of the compliance programs across the board, even in the local privately held companies and also in the publicly traded multinationals.
I know you had a large number of respondents to the surveys with literally a mix of multinational, regional, national corporations. What do you see in the terms of levels of importance of compliance programming based upon the companies that responded?
Yeah. So one of the trends, and maybe it's not fair to characterize it as a trend, but one of the things that's held constant since we started doing this survey in 2008 is that about 90% of respondents consider consider anti-corruption concerns, consider corruption to be one of the major risk areas for their companies. In this particular edition of the survey, for example, we had about 58% of the respondents say that corruption was their top priority for their company. And about a further 32 some odd percent said it was a moderate priority. Those figures are pretty consistent across the surveys that we've done. So I think that's fair to say that people are constantly recognizing that corruption is a challenge, and then taking steps to address that.
One of my other observations about some of the prior surveys moving forward to 2020 was that most of the time early on, it was you guys representing a U.S. company who might be looking at a Brazilian partner or doing business in Brazil. And now I see you guys having perhaps a Brazilian client or a U.S. company who has to respond to a Brazilian company from a business partner
Mm-hmm.
perspective. And does this information in this survey give the U.S. company a way to craft a compliance program more in tune to the Clean Companies Act than perhaps the FCPA to help mold it to what the Brazilians want to see?
So the survey doesn't focus on specific legislation. It doesn't focus on the FCPA or the Clean Companies Act or any of the other applicable laws in a given jurisdiction. What it does do is ask about some of the what we would consider best practices. And so in that sense, you can look at the Clean Companies Act. You can look at the administrative guidance in Brazil about what constitutes an effective compliance program, much like you could look at DOJ or DOJ and SEC guidance in the United States and see what factors they're looking at. And you'll find some commonalities. And the survey does address some of those areas such that you could say, okay, if I'm going to be in Brazil, if I'm a U.S. company that's setting up shop there, I'm going to want to meet obviously my U.S. requirements, but what are the Brazilian requirements? And you pretty quickly see that some of them do overlap.
Greg, if I was advising a U.S. company and I started off with what is perceived to be the highest risk, of course, I would say third parties, but there are numerous other compliance risks. And I was wondering what the survey may have told us about compliance programs when around risks like gift travel and entertainment, or something around training or reporting systems, something really other than third parties. Do you see anything in that data?
So we certainly see that companies are investing more and more in developing training programs, in developing audit programs, for example, to look at their third parties, to develop their third party program as well, just from a due diligence perspective. One of the really interesting parts, though, to the survey is that you can think about third parties, you can think about diligence, you can think about auditing, you can think about training, but then our survey also allows you to look at which institutions are the ones that are causing people the most grief in Latin America. And one of the things that I've been looking at a lot lately are the police and security forces in Latin America. And in parts of the region, particularly in Mexico and parts of Central America, police compose a real challenge for companies. Security forces compose a real challenge for companies, and our survey actually reflects that as well. So, if I were a compliance officer in house and I was, say, running a program in Guatemala or El Salvador, I would be very concerned about how my employees are interacting with those security forces, what sort of training they're getting for hiring third parties to maybe do local delivery. What sort of training are those third parties getting? What is their track record? What do our audits of them show in terms of payments payments potentially being made improperly?
Greg, in researching you, the firm, and this survey, I came across an article that you co-wrote with your colleague Alejandra Almonte around COVID-19, coronavirus, and Latin America. So I've been saving this question for you, which is this survey was conducted before COVID-19 really took full hit in Latin America. But where do you see, or what do you see some of the biggest compliance challenges literally for perhaps the next 12 to 18 months related to coronavirus?
Yeah, the survey did go out just before COVID really did hit the region, and it's just devastating for those of us who spent a lot of time in the region to see how badly it really is hitting big and small countries alike in Latin America. And I think, Tom, your estimation there in time frame is probably spot on. It's going to be a long time before folks are out of the COVID woods here. In response to your question, there are going to be commercial challenges, there are going to be operational challenges, there are going to be labor challenges. Those are probably three big buckets that I would put the challenges. In terms of commercial challenges, we're seeing from some clients that their businesses just died. Their businesses just died is probably the wrong word at this point in time. Sorry for that, but it's really dropped off. But other clients are seeing their business spike and boom. I mean, they're providing medical devices, or they're providing PPE, or they're providing something else that is needed in the current moment. So that part of their business is doing just gangbusters. But from a compliance perspective, you want to think about how are you incentivizing your employees during these times when you think about the commercial challenges. If the sales folks can't make their numbers, does that mean that they're not going to get their full compensation package? If they're not, then they might be inclined to go ahead and do some things inappropriately, such that they can, still put food on the table for their families. From an operational perspective, one of the things we're seeing is just the challenge of keeping your business open. Obviously, with strong labor unions and strong labor ministries in the region, they are going to want to look out for the workers and make sure that workers are safe. So if you do have your office open, your company open, I think you can expect a little bit more involvement than you might otherwise with the labor ministry, with your unions, and expect them to really want to understand when it's safe for the workers to be there, and for them to have a voice in saying when it's not. That really does lead to sort of the labor challenge, which could mean that workers walk out. Increased inspections obviously mean an increased opportunity for improper payments to facilitate an easy inspection. So these are the types of things that we're seeing from clients, and probably will see for the foreseeable future as COVID has its hands firmly around the region.
Well, Greg, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Miller & Chevalier 2020 Latin American Corruption Survey. We've linked to the survey itself in the show notes in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. So download a copy in your native language and check it out. It's chock full of information. I hope you'll join us again for our next episode, where I sit down with James Tillen and Matt Ellis, both firm members, and we take a look back at the series of Latin American corruption surveys that the firm has engaged in literally since 2008. Try to take a retrospective and look at some of the bigger pictures, stories, and issues that have developed around anti-corruption compliance and anti-corruption enforcement in Latin America literally over the past 12 years. It's an episode I know you will enjoy, and you certainly will not want to miss. This special 5-part podcast series has been a special presentation of the Compliance Podcast Network.